which is a full-time residential training center in Lowell, Vermont. This event is a time for meditation and community to come together. And as always, feel free to get up, stretch, go to the bathroom if you need, grab water if you need. You can sit on the ground if it's more comfortable. And enjoy this week's talk with our head teacher, Soryu, another week of Mind the Music as the topic.
Is it important for me to be sitting here for the sake of the recorder?
No, the recorder can move.
Just a little off-center in the room. Thank you. Thank you. So we will be doing another session on Mind the Music this week, and may continue on. I'll be interested in your feedback about whether you'd like to continue with this style of teaching, an exploration of sound, of music. And this week we have the opportunity to listen to music created by Danny Joseph, who's one of the residents at the Monastic Academy. Everything we'll be listening to is by him, both written and recorded by him. He is quite an impressive musician, and some of you may be interested in looking him up and listening to his the music that he's released. And he's releasing another, not really in this world actually. What is it called?
Album.
An album. He's releasing a new album. Are we allowed to say what it is? Or is it still secret? Oh, it's a new album. I'm not going to share anything just in case it's secret. I've listened to it, but it hasn't been released yet, and it's very nice. So I'm glad that we all have a chance to take advantage of his skills in this community. So one of the should I have this on?
Yes, please, yeah.
One of the themes that we explore in a meditative tradition, in every meditative tradition that I know of, one of the themes that is explored is as we might say, the participatory nature of perception. So this is a complicated phrase, but it means that what you perceive isn't just coming to you. You're also going out to it. And the two of you meet. And how you meet, where you meet, and the progressive nature of that meeting changes what you perceive. I more and more have been interested in the original terms within the Buddhist tradition in Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is a very interesting language. It's not many of the things that lots of people claim it is. I've heard lots of people say that it's the oldest language in the world, for example. This is obviously incorrect. Not worth talking about. It's supposed to have certain mystical qualities that other languages don't have. I haven't found that either. But it's interesting in that the most sophisticated meditative systems in the world, as far as I can tell, were developed in India. And it's normal that there would be a part of the world where something is the most advanced. We've seen this at many times in human history, that a certain part of the world has taken a certain discipline further than other civilizations have. And in terms of samadhi, in terms of deep meditative awareness, in terms of an exploration of consciousness, it does seem that India, and then cultures impacted by India, including China, have explored these points more than others, and including more than the West or the modern world has today. What's interesting about Sanskrit, therefore, is that it is the language that was used by people who were making a deep exploration into what you might call perception. What is it to perceive? How does that impact your behavior? How does your behavior impact perception? At what levels? At what time scales? These points have been discussed, have been explored in great detail, and it's been discovered that it matters, that answers to these questions actually matter. Which can seem surprising. In terms of the West, something that we take as much more real than something like deep meditative awareness is mathematics. We often think of mathematics as being unreasonably accurate, unreasonably useful, unreasonably descriptive of the objective world, which would indicate that mathematics is real in some way. And one of the pieces of evidence that we have for this is that when you dive into mathematics, you may find certain ideas that don't make any sense, that are obviously just imaginary, that don't relate to the real world, only to later discover that they actually do relate to the real world. And even if you call them imaginary, they still don't seem to be that way, because you can use them to actually impact the objective world that we live in. For example, these lights. These lights are in fact on. And how does that happen? Well, there's one of the things that describes and is actually used to figure out how to best utilize lighting as a technology is something that we call imaginary numbers. Now, there are these things called imaginary numbers which have to do with the square root of -1, which obviously doesn't exist. It must just be imaginary. And people at first just toss it around as a kind of a freak idea. Just, here's an idea, obviously it doesn't have any application because it doesn't have any relationship to the objective world. Only to later discover it has a very significant relationship to the objective world, and we can use it to both predict and alter the behavior in the objective world. And so electricity and many of the aspects of lighting is impacted by this strange mathematical formulation. In the same way, so we see that as very real and very significant. So math feels very real. And math is a kind of thing. Math is a kind of understanding. It's a kind of perception. It's a kind of relationship with the world. You put numbers on things, somehow. Somehow you decide how to number things. You decide what numbers are. You decide which numbers are bigger than what other numbers. And then with all that, you understand in a certain way. That act of understanding is participatory in the same way that when we enter samadhi, when we enter deep meditation, when we enter absorption, we come to understand, come to perceive the world in different ways. And one of the words that we have in Sanskrit, in this language of people who took the exploration of consciousness, of direct experience, very, very far. One of the words that they made a lot of use of is sanjñā. Does anyone happen to know the word sanjñā? Okay, just a little bit. All right, so sanjñā or sanya in the Pali language is another Buddhist language. Sanjñā is hard to translate because people who translate it into English want to translate it either as one word or another. One word that it's often translated as is conception, which is to say the way you conceive of things. There's a concept, like chair. So there's the concept chair. Conception would be sanjñā, that's true. But other people translate it as perception. You can perceive a chair. And for most of us, at least in the West, we have the sense that there just really is a chair. There it is. It's there. I mean, you can see it. It must be there of itself on its own side, as they say. This is actually a technical term in the tradition. That the chair exists on its own side, and then you just passively perceive the perception of the chair. Other people would say, well, no, you have to conceive of a chair. You have the idea chair, and then you can build it. Because you conceived of the chair, you can build the chair in the objective world, and then after that you just perceive it as it is. And so we have a clear delineation between conception and perception. We, at a level that most of us don't ever explore, believe that these are two totally different things independent of each other. But the word sanjñā, both of these are included in the same word. Everyone knows that they depend on each other. That conception and perception are two parts of the same thing. It's not that you're saying there's no such thing as a world, but you're also not saying there's no such thing as a mind. The perception and the conception are one single thing that depend on each other. And this really matters because the way we behave depends on the way we perceive. The way we perceive depends on the way we conceive, if we're going to divide it up in that way. So we participate in what we perceive. Most people would agree that we participate in how we behave. But what we don't always know is that once you perceive a situation a certain way, the number of responses that you can come up with are deeply and sternly, hardly, what's the word for that? Really, tightly limited. If you see things a certain way, then you're going to respond in a much smaller set of reactions, of strategies, than if you saw it in a broader context. This is something one of the easiest ways we can see it is in personal relationships, because someone will say something and we will perceive a certain thing. They mean this, they're having this experience, I know that, and because they're having this experience, I have to respond in this way. But in fact, we may discover that they weren't having that experience. When they said those words, they didn't mean the thing that we interpret it as. And in our culture, this is getting a little heady, but here we go. So English is a particularly speaker-based language. Okay, so that most languages are place far more responsibility on the listener than we do in the West in general, but in English in particular. The listener is expected to be far more involved than we think they should be at least in the US, but in English in general. So if someone says something and we don't understand, we typically say, well, you should have been more clear. Why didn't you say what you meant? Versus understanding, well, I didn't understand what you were saying, so why didn't I listen more clearly? Why didn't I hear what you meant? It's on me to hear what you meant. So I lived in Asia, and Japan is a language, English isn't the most extreme, what they call transmitter-based language. So the person who's giving information has the responsibility to convey it. But it's pretty far. Japanese isn't the most extreme in terms of a receiver-based language, but it's pretty far, which means that it's basically the listener's job to understand. But living there, more and more I saw that when I didn't understand, it was taken to be my problem. You weren't listening clearly enough. You had all these ideas in your head. You didn't understand me because you weren't listening. I remember I was talking to a Korean nun at one point. She was visiting the United States and talking to various Buddhist masters in the US to see kind of where are we at? How are things going here? How is the Buddhist master movement going in the US? And so she met with a number of them, and I actually introduced her to Shinzen, and she introduced Shinzen. They had a very interesting conversation that I got to witness. Anyway, after this whole thing, I asked her about her trip and how it went, and I said, so how is it? You know, how are the Buddhist teachers in the US, in your opinion? And she said, they want to be great teachers. And I had the same reaction that I just heard you have, kind of exhaled but didn't know what to say back, and not entirely sure what to say to that. And so I said, so are you saying that they're not great masters, not great teachers? And she said very nicely, it was so good of her to teach me how to listen. She said, I said what I said, now it's your job to understand.
Whoa.
It's very nice. I said what I said, now it's your job to understand. I did my part, now you as the listener need to do your part. Otherwise we don't have an appropriate relationship here. It's not my job to make sure that you understand. Which is very different from how we look at it, partially because we divide apart this perception and conception so completely. It's our job to learn how to listen in an open way, but also in a participatory way, and there are different ways of participating. Some are more useful than others. So, while it's true that in relationships and communication we see that this is true, it can be quite overwhelming to explore that, because it can quickly become a fight. You're talking to someone and they say something and you say, I think you meant this, and they say, this really matters to me, this isn't the time for you to explore your meditative practice. So instead of that, we can make use of music, we can make use of sound to explore the way that we participate in our perception. Until eventually we realize that there isn't an escape from that. A lot of the time we'd like, and I know it's okay, I know you've had a long week, I'm at work now and you're not, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot too much. You can sit there and be, quote, passive if you'd like to believe that. I'm not going to put you on the spot too much, but I just want to mention that your experience of my talks is mostly not due to my talk. Shinzen, early on in my teaching career, told me, he said, you know, 90% of what people hear at your talks is either what they came in hoping they'd hear or came in being afraid that they would hear. So their hopes and their fears are going to determine 90% of what they experience at your talk. If you say something similar to what they were hoping you'd say, they'll hear that, regardless of what you said. Even if there's a significant difference between what you said. If you say something similar to what they were afraid you'd say, they'll hear that. And they won't listen to the rest of the talk because they already know that you're wrong. So know that to some extent you can sit there and be relaxed if you want, but know that even if you're doing that, still subconsciously you are participating in what you're experiencing. And you, in this couple of hours, get to observe that, explore that, and even change that, so that you can have an experience of greater happiness, greater clarity, greater peace, and ultimately greater compassion. So let's move into something very simple. It may seem to you, it's reasonable that it would, you've learned how to do this from when you were very young, and it apparently is structured right into your nervous system. So not surprising that you do this, but it's likely that as you hear me speaking right now, you hear words. Right? Most of you probably hear words. Right? If you're nodding, then or shaking your head, either way. It's possible to enter such a state of samadhi that you don't hear words anymore. And we're going to explore what that's like. I'll give you the opportunity to listen to something so carefully that you don't hear the words anymore. The words that you hear are participation. You're participating in the experience of these sounds. Sounds are coming out of my mouth, and you're turning them into words. That's just one layer of adding on, of both filtering and expanding on the direct experience. It goes from there. But just to hear words already is an elaborate act of intellectual gymnastics. To hear words at all is already quite impressive. And you can well, the dog here, in all likelihood, we're not sure I suppose, but in all likelihood isn't hearing the same richness of words that you are. And you can listen to other animals speak, and it's likely that you also listen to the crows, for example. Unlikely that you hear the same richness as in English, or if you listen to another language, kore mo kotoba desu, it's unlikely that you just heard, not most of you, unless some of you speak Japanese, heard as much richness in terms of words as in English. So kore mo kotoba desu means these also are words. This also is language. But if we don't know how to add on that layer of complexity, then we don't participate in the perception of conception. So what we're going to do now is listen to an English phrase, and listen to it. I'm going to make you listen to it over a period of about 5 minutes. Listen to it with increasing accuracy, so that you hear exactly what is being said, until you hear it so precisely that you can't hear the words anymore. So you can just listen, but really listen. That's the only assignment. Listen, this is, you could say, a kind of music. Listen deeply to these words. This is on, I suppose?
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
There's a whole world out there. 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 There's a whole world out there.
Very good. I'd actually like to listen to that again, one more time. And this time, pay attention to two things. One is, what is the moment when you lose track of what it's saying? Meaning that you actually can't keep track of what it's saying. You can't hear the words anymore. You have to hear the sounds instead of the words. So in other words, right now, I'm speaking. Of course, there are sounds, but you're basically hearing words. It would be difficult, for example, for you to not hear the words. You can try right now if you want. I'm speaking, I'm speaking, I'm speaking. Can you just hear sound and not words? That may be difficult. The words take precedence over the sounds. You can get yourself to hear the sounds too, but the words just keep on barging in and taking over. There's a point at which that shifts in this recording when you at least have to try to remember what the word is. But it even can come to the point when the sound is so interesting, or it becomes far more compelling than the addition of the word to it. The second is, at what point does your mind wander? So you can come back again and remember, that's right, that we're at the world, there's that one sound I can pick up, out, okay, I can get it. But during the word, your mind wanders, you think of something else, and you come back. There's time for your mind to wander, right within the sentence. So again, listen very closely to how it is that there's a point of shift from basically hearing words to basically hearing sounds. Even it may get to the point when you can't hear the words anymore. And then also watch how it is that your mind wanders right within words, if it does, if it wanders away from the sounds. right within the words of the recording. We'll listen to this one more time, and then we'll try something else.
There's a whole world out there. 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 There's a whole world out there.
There's a whole world out there. There's a whole world out there. There's a whole world out there. There's a whole world out there. There's a whole world out there. There's a whole world out there. There's a whole world out there. There's a whole world out there. There's a whole world out
So, before we move on to the next exercise, are there any comments on that? Your experience? Yes?
After the 11th or 12th iteration, if you would play that for me, or anything after the, say, the 12th iteration, I would not have easily at all been able to figure out what the heck he was saying.
Yeah.
The second listen, it had lost all its novelty, so I was daydreaming pretty much immediately. But the first time around, I was going back and forth between, I had been spending way too much time in Burlington, combined with as it got slower. This is a really interesting tool for like slow motion analysis of how your tongues and lips and everything move to just say that sentence.
Great.
So I was kind of going between those two and staying pretty focused on it because it gets slower and slower and slower.
Right.
Second time around, the novelty was gone as well.
Right. Good. So, so this is an excellent, again, not to put you too much on the spot, but a little bit on the spot. This is a good example of the participatory nature of perception, right? So the boredom is something that you added on to the experience because, in fact, it was very novel. I've listened to that more times than you, and the second time around I noticed a whole new series of insights about exactly what was happening. And by exactly what's happening, I don't mean adding on analysis of tongue, lip, how we make sounds, which is obviously adding on conceptualization to the direct experience. But I mean the directly experiencing how rich the human voice is in its tones and noticing that I hadn't heard a number of aspects of the sound. So, so on the one hand, we can say that this is adding stuff on, but on the other point, you said that you were daydreaming almost right away, which was one of the assignments, right? When is it that you start to daydream?
Well, only on the second.
Second one you said
time around.
pretty quickly,
Right.
but that was one of the reasons
First time around, basically not at all.
very little. But that was the assignment on the second time, for that reason. So, at what point does your mind wander? That mind wandering is actually highly significant. It matters a lot, partially because of the question of when we're listening to people and we think we know what they're saying, how often do we just vanish until they finish saying what we already knew they were going to say, and we can come back and be involved in the conversation again. It's possible that, as certainly has been my experience with that, that by staying with it, we notice that we actually didn't hear it at first, that someone might be saying something to us that we didn't hear. And of all the people in the world who this is important for, all the people who we might be listening to who we don't hear, there is one that I'd suggest, especially in a meditative tradition, that you pay most attention to, and that is yourself. It's very common that as we are sitting, that we have apparently arbitrary thoughts. The same voice will play in our head, saying the same thing. We'll quote daydream, and we'll start to quote obsess about something. And it's the 100th, the 1000th time we've heard ourselves tell the same story to ourselves. So one thing you can do, one response to that, is to finally and truly listen to yourself, talk to yourself. Because often you have something to say to yourself that you yourself haven't heard yourself say. That you may be saying something to you that is important for you to know. But you haven't listened. And so there's only one thing you know how to do with yourself. Which is, I guess I just have to tell him again. I don't know what else to do with this guy. I know I've already repeated this 100 times, but he just hasn't heard it yet. And so I'm going to say it again. And then we don't listen again. We say, I already know what you're saying, I get it. Will you go away? I want to return to my breath. And And then, okay, well, he can't return to his breath until he knows this thing. Because his inability to concentrate is due to his inability to understand this simple point. So I'll say it again. And then we say it again, and say, okay, I get it. Go away, voice. Go away, me. I want to pay attention to my breath right now. And that then itself can become this reiterated pattern. And the two patterns fight with each other, and we're not listening to any of it. We're not present for any of it. So even the daydream we can start to approach in the same way as this recording. But what happens beyond that is that, especially for those of us who go pretty deep in the practice, you can get to the point when you're listening to the beginning of the word so clearly that, well, you're listening to the beginning of the word very clearly, and then that passes, and then you listen to the middle of the word very clearly, and that passes, and you listen to the end of the word very clearly. But by the time you're hearing the end of the word, the beginning of the word is just gone. You don't remember it anymore, because you're paying so much attention to the middle of the word that the beginning of the word is forgotten. And if you listen to the words in your head that clearly, you can't understand anything you're saying to yourself. That can actually be quite frightening. It can feel scary to get to the point when you don't understand what you yourself are thinking. We often are very much attached to what we think, what we believe, and if we lose that, then we feel like we're losing everything. We'll feel like we'll die. So we want to get there relatively slowly, and that's done by paying attention in a way that we understand the words, and then you keep on paying more attention until you don't understand the words anymore. But the words typically will carry you there in a way that's similar to this. So a challenge is to notice, okay, there's boredom here, but that's something I'm adding on. What if I were to listen intently enough that even the boredom falls away and there's just the sound? How would that carry me more and more deeply into this direct experience? Does that make sense? Great. Well, we can... Is it okay? Just keep going. We'll have plenty of opportunities to report. I want to move into the next one here. The next recording. This... how do I do this?
Can I throw a quick observation in there?
I don't think it would be fair since I told other people not to.
Okay.
Seems kind of mean for me to do that. Right? Other people had their hands up. I said, not now.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I missed the hands. Okay.
No, good. I don't know how to use these devices. Sorry, everyone. I'll try. No, don't do that. Don't do that. There. Excellent. I'm going to make a comment in any case, huh?
Always.
All right. Here we go. So the question for you is very simple. What are you hearing? That's all. What is this? And by that I don't mean to tell me, oh, actually, I'm going to leave it at that. Yes. What are you hearing?
You don't want to define hearing.
No, I don't. What are you hearing? That's what I'm going to ask. Here we go. good. So what was that?
A hole punch.
Excellent. That's what I hoped would happen. That's why I didn't define it. Good. So a hole punch. Yes? That answers the question of what are you hearing? Right? A hole punch. Let's take note of that answer. Anyone else?
Rain, not rain, a leak in my roof. Or
leak in the
the bathtub is overflowing and dripping into the downstairs living room.
Perfect. Hole punch. A leak. Yep.
I first heard like a shape,
Uh-huh.
so I could like see this thing.
Uh-huh.
Then it was more like a very short thing that got repeated in my mind. I was like memorizing it until the next one came, was like echoing,
Uh-huh.
same thing over and over again.
Uh-huh.
And then at the end it was more like sound and then like silence. And then,
Great. Excellent. Yep.
I felt it so clearly in my face.
Mm-hmm.
Like every time there would be the sound, it would feel like that, and then whenever there would be the silence, it would feel like that.
Great.
Is it the same sound every time?
Was it? Was it the same sound every time? You tell me. That's what I'm asking. Yes? Yes?
No.
Okay. Good, yes?
I heard a lot of different things. From the device that you had, I heard a steady clicking sound that seemed to change pitch occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
I heard somebody's stomach growling, and I heard my own voice,
Mm-hmm.
and I heard people laughing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a number of things.
Great. Excellent. Good. Well, let me ask you some specific questions now. Was the tempo regular?
No.
No.
We have some no's, we have some yeses.
Yes?
Yes, no, yes, no.
Some of the time.
Wow.
Honestly, it sounded like it could be a clock tick just amplified. Like it sounded pretty regular most of the time.
And how regular is pretty regular?
Like once a second.
What?
Like once a second.
It
Like
was perfectly regular?
it seemed like it probably was. I almost pulled out my phone and just looked at it to see if it was exactly 1 second intervals. Honestly.
It's amazing. It's amazing, isn't it? Just that last comment is actually very interesting. Last part really matters. A lot. The last thing you said, that matters a lot. That says a lot about our current civilization. That says a lot. I almost pulled out my phone to see. It was exactly 1 second. That was very helpful. Thank you for bringing that point up. Good. So there's some disagreement, I'd say, actually, about whether it was perfectly regular. Some people would say yes, some people would say no. Great. Shall we up the ante a bit here?
Okay.
So raise your hand if you think it was not perfectly regular. Excellent. That's great. So that means that you are really listening. Those of you who raised your hand, I really appreciate that you were really listening. It was perfectly regular. I stopped it just before it switched.
Got it.
So part of the recording, the later part of the recording, it's not perfectly regular. Slightly changes. But for everything we were listening to, it was exactly 1 beat for every 1.8 seconds. I changed it.
Would you
I slowed
please
it
restate that? You just said two things, didn't you? It was perfectly regular and then it was also irregular. Did I hear you say?
It was 1 beat every 1.8 experience, they last longer. And in fact, I would take it further, which is why I loved your comment. Are you sure? Can you be sure that in fact it didn't take longer? Can you be sure that Danny and I are correct in saying that it was exactly regular? Can you know that? This is a very important question to ask, because it's common for us now to say, well, the phone is the highest authority in the universe. It's correct. The phone is the highest authority. If the phone says it's perfectly regular, it is. And my direct experience is wrong. It's common. That's what you said, actually. So that's where we're at nowadays. That's where we're at. We've gotten to this point. And it isn't just in terms of how long does it take for a beat to happen. It's in a lot of other ways too. What is really true? Is it your direct experience, or is it what you're told is the truth by some device? Of course, the phone is going to accord with the phone. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're right. In the same way that if you think something and then you really think it through and decide you're right, that doesn't prove much. Of course, thinking is going to accord with thinking. You haven't demonstrated a lot of credibility. What? So,
That's why you need a phone.
That's why you need a phone. So we take a certain approach to things, and we validate the thing with the thing. But what this practice does, it allows us to pay attention to something that we usually miss, and that is our own direct experience. So if your direct experience, if you're paying a lot of attention and you conclude that it wasn't perfectly regular, how can you know that that's wrong? What is the higher authority in your life than your own direct experience? This is very important for us to examine closely. Because as time has passed, as civilization has proceeded, more and more we found ways of convincing people you shouldn't believe in your own direct experience, you should believe in this other doctrine that we're going to push off on you. And I'd say that the modern world has done that more than any other. We often say, oh, all those people in medieval Europe who were indoctrinated by the church, and think, good thing we're not in that position. Good thing we're beyond all that. It's not true. I think we're much more indoctrinated than people were at that time. In my view, we have a far harder time trusting our own direct experience. And as far as I can tell, it's one of the we practice discounting and even despising our own direct experience, which is, I believe, one of the major reasons that we have such a self-confidence crisis. We have so much shame in our world, so much self-shaming, because we practice again and again, I know that this is true, but it's wrong. So that's that. I know I'm wrong. This is true also. No, I'm wrong. My phone says this. And we practice that again and again until it becomes incorporated into our identities. So with this practice, we have the chance to directly pay attention to direct experience and learn from it directly. And hopefully someone like me is a conduit to that, not a source of some kind of conclusion in and of. My teachings shouldn't be some kind of final conclusion. They're ways of looking at things to free us from the traps that we've fallen into. And then we can directly confirm or deny whatever claim there may be. Anything else on that before we move on to the next?
Well, yes, because what it did confirm is that I was wrong
About what?
about the fact, the perfect fact of the timing 1.8. And I believed my experience. That's my
Yeah.
subjective experience. But what you just said leaves me you know, well, okay, I like my experience, but maybe I should always check it with the facts. But we know that that's a relative fact.
What is a relative fact?
The time. That's,
Tell me more.
It's an arbitrary measurement.
And what do you mean when you say arbitrary?
Well, that means that somebody made it up.
Time?
Yeah, at one point, yeah, humans made it up. Or
In
one
terms
day.
of the amount of time.
Yeah.
That's
in terms
true.
of the measure.
That's true. Yeah, I slowed it down a little bit. Danny made it at 1 beat per second. I slowed it down.
Mhm.
I slowed it down to 0.6 speed. Does that mean 1.8 seconds?
But what does it mean that the... What does
Does
it
anyone
mean
know?
that
I
the-
brought our calculators.
Say it.
when we read that the scientists, physicists are telling us that the universe is speeding up, what does that do with our timing?
Great. This is a good question. So again, there's so much here. Scientists tell us that the universe is speeding up.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting statement, but it's also just interesting to question who is the authority here?
Well, I know that time is speeding up for me.
Right. And it actually is. Most people, as they get older, time speeds up. It's a very common experience. And you should all know that. Everyone please know that the amount of time that you will in all likelihood experience in the next 10 years is far less than the amount of time you experienced in the last 10 years. Please know that. The time you have to live is probably decreasing in 2 ways.
Well, there's another
Yes.
thing. The other thing is if we are
not
modeled after the Earth, after the universe, then perhaps this is true for all of us.
Well, it could be, of course, that the way that scientists mean it may be different from the way we mean it. Scientists may be referring to something, but again, beyond that, I'm not an authority on what physicists say is going to happen over the next 30 billion years. But I can say that we've given a lot of authority to, quote, scientists, whoever that is. I don't really know who they are. It's common, we used to say they. You know, in medieval Europe, they would say, the scriptures say, or God says, such and such. And nowadays we say, you know, they did a study that showed such and such. And the same blind faith snaps in our minds, and we think, oh, well, then it must be true. If they say it, then we don't know who they are, but somebody says something. It's a study of some kind. And we just give into it. The point I'm making is that we now have the chance to directly experience something, to directly examine something. And that has another kind of value. So before we go into this, I just want to say it's very interesting that you said that you learned that you were wrong. But then later I think you said that maybe you're not wrong. Maybe your subjective experience is valid.
I said I like it.
Right. But that doesn't relate to how true it is, does it?
No, I guess that's what I was asking you, what you thought about this whole experiment. I don't know what I know you're not making a conclusion, and you're kind of leaving that up to me.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Yes?
Yes, so I'm older or getting even older, and time is totally slowing down.
Yeah, that is possible. That's right.
Like each moment gets like, do like chewing gum. Like
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yep, that's possible.
Right.
So that's probably because of your spiritual practice.
Yes.
You're learning. So it isn't that time speeding up is an inherent. It isn't that it has to happen that way. It's not an inherent quality of a human life. It is possible through a practice to get better and better at slowing things down. But for most people, things do speed up more and more for a lot of different reasons. But the main, and I could give you a long list of why it is that in general time speeds up. But the main solution to that is to have a practice as you do, and that you're intentionally learning how to, as I put it, it's not literally true, but you're creating time. You know how to get more time into a second, more time into a minute, more time into a year. Like you said, you can stretch it out and then experience more. So it's good that you bring it up, because I certainly didn't mean to imply that it's somehow required. It's just that most people, and maybe you would agree with this, most people do experience it that way. And then many of us are in a position where that doesn't happen, doesn't have to happen that way. And I think it's completely, and the point is, if you look at Buddhist mythology, they say that at times when there's a deeper spiritual practice in the world, people live far longer. They say here was this time when people had a really deep spiritual practice and they lived 20, 80,000 years. And then everybody says, obviously that's wrong because we know better now, because we're scientific and we're not indoctrinated anymore. But I would ask, well, why wouldn't that be true? They could, let's say that they could, I know for me, how much longer is a second when I'm really paying attention? Well, if I'm not paying attention, how long is a second? Virtually infinitesimally short. I notice virtually nothing. So we'll call that 1/100th of a second, say. So a second is collapsed to 1/100th of a second. I've missed that part of my life. It's gone forever, except for, say, just for the sake of math, 1/100th of it, just to make the math easy. How much longer than a typical second, if I'm kind of paying attention a little bit, is it if I'm really paying attention? I mean, that can last an hour, say an hour. So the way I often will experience an hour, I can experience that same amount of richness in 1 second if I'm really paying attention. Like you said, stretch it out. So somebody maybe can do the math, 1/100th of a second. How much longer is an hour than that? Call it 50 minutes, if that makes the math easier. Anyone know?
6,000 times longer.
It's 6,000 times longer. Thank you. So 6,000, and then let's say we live for 100 years, just again for the sake of math, right? Then that's 600,000 years, right? That it would be possible to live. So you, compared to most people, will live tens of thousands of years longer.
My goal is 1,000.
What? 1,000 years longer, and who is to say that that's wrong? Who is to say that these Buddhist texts aren't saying something true? Right? You have a certain way of looking at things. But if you look at things from a different perspective, then you're participating in a different kind of perception. And that kind of perception may be very useful. So to me, it really matters that time for me is not just speeding up out of control, as it is for many people I know. It really matters. This practice is literally saving my life. And will do so for apparently thousands of years.
And a second very
please.
short question.
Yeah.
So, like direct experience, right? I think it's so beautiful to have it and to see it clearly, as opposed to something that tells me or believe I have learned as a child or what my phone says. And then at some point, how far can you go with that? Right? I mean, if I have a direct experience, that's really all I have, right? I have my own direct experience. You know, and maybe that's my entire truth. So I can't make that leap saying there's a reality out there that is, that I have an experience in this direct. And it's an experience, it's not a thing.
Yeah.
Or can I go further and say, oh, there's actually this?
I think it's important to go further. I think it's of the utmost importance to go further. And if I were to say something like, you shouldn't, like all you should have is your own direct experience. The only thing that matters is your own direct experience. Yes, if I were to say that. The only truth is your own direct experience. You shouldn't have any beliefs. You shouldn't come to any further conclusions. If I were to say that, then obviously that would be hypocritical. Does that make sense?
Not yet.
Well, I would be telling you, if I'm telling you don't believe anything anyone tells you, in fact, don't believe anything at all, then I'm telling you to believe something in that very moment. So it's immediately hypocritical. It's demonstrably hypocritical. So I'm not saying that. I would claim that there is such a thing as a good way of looking at things. There's such a thing as right view. There's such a thing as an appropriate way to understand things. And it's dangerous for us spiritual types to get attached to an entirely direct experience. That's still a kind of attachment, and doesn't allow our minds to function as they naturally do. But the thing is that if we get attached to a certain way of looking at things, that's also a kind of attachment. And so the appropriate point to look at isn't, do you have views? Because you may or may not have views. You can set aside views and have direct experience. You can take on views and analyze, understand that experience in certain ways. The question is, are you attached? Is there attachment there? Is there attachment to no view? Is there attachment to a view? Either way, that's the thing that we have to look at, because that's the cue that something may be off. Does that make sense? No, it's, again, really good that you bring it up. Because it's common for these sorts of talks to be interpreted as saying you shouldn't believe anything, know anything, think anything. All there is your direct experience. But the statement, all there is your direct experience, is again, obviously a hypocritical teaching. So you have to be careful of that. Look out for someone who is making a claim like that. Because they're not living the thing that they're telling you that you should live. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm not making that claim. Okay, let's move on so that we have a little bit more time to practice. Going to listen to a few more songs. And this time, allow yourself to fall in to this song again, one that Danny composed and provided to us. And right now, once again, simply enjoy, move directly into the experience of the sound. Notice whatever it is you're experiencing. If you think it's a paper puncher, then no, okay, I am participating in the experience, adding that on. If you think it's a drip, then no, that's what I'm personally adding on. If you're feeling something, that again, everybody will be experiencing different things in all likelihood. And yet, and I'm not telling you to stop doing it, I'm saying notice your direct experience and whatever else you may be giving to it. next song, don't pay attention to the music. Pay attention to your body. So setting aside the music, pay attention to your body. Of course, the music may have an impact on your body. That's fine. Let it do that. But what you're paying attention to is body sensation. Continue to attend to body sensations. The challenge right now is to watch whatever reactions you have. If you wish, you can take it to the next, you can take the technique to the next level of complexity and watch how it is that your body reactions impact how you hear the music. If you want to experiment with that, you can intentionally relax your body as you listen and see how that impacts the way you hear what you're listening to. So, in any case, attend to body sensations. If you'd like, you can manipulate your body sensations by intentionally relaxing your body in order to explore how that impacts the way you hear.
Please.
Once again, pay attention to body sensations. This is your opportunity to pay attention to how you're feeling. If you want to explore how the feelings in your body impact the way you listen, the way you hear, and you can manipulate the way you're feeling by increasing your relaxation and seeing how that impacts the experience of listening to the music. And for the final exercise of this evening, pay attention to your idea, your story of your future. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? What's the rest of your life going to be like? And pay attention to how that is impacted by the songs that we just listened to. So think about your life. Think about what you're going to do. Your conception of yourself, your future. And pay attention to how that's impacted by your perception, by the songs that are played. Continue to do this exercise in silence. Continue to think about your future. What will you do with your life? And how is that impacted by the perception of silence? Continue to do the same exercise as we move into the next song. continue to do the same exercise as we sit in silence. This will be the last song. Again, pay attention to how the perception of the song impacts your conception of yourself. One more minute, do the exercise in silence. Very good. Excellent. time for any further reports or questions on the technique or on the experience. Thank you very much, Danny, for writing us with those tracks. I appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Mhm.
The final exercise was very humbling for me because the music made all of my stories dissolve because they weren't the right soundtrack, and then I realized that there's always an underlying soundtrack to my vision of my life in the future, and when I let go of that soundtrack, there's something that's so much more simple.
Mm-hmm. Great. It is interesting that we tend to choose the soundtrack that will maintain the story, and it can sometimes feel discordant or irritating to listen to a soundtrack that doesn't accord with our idea of who we are. One of the exercises that I wanted to do, I don't know if we'll be able to do it because we've been having some copyright issues around using songs and posting the recordings and such, using popular songs. But one thing that is nice is to intentionally listen to music that people listen to who you don't identify with, people who you perhaps don't like. You intentionally listen to music that you don't like, or you listen to music that people who you don't like listen to. And practice liking it. Get better and better at liking that music. And in doing that, it's amazing how quickly we can change how we perceive ourselves. Because music has an impact on our identity. So you have to structure an identity that likes that music. Your identity changes. And you first of all gain sympathy for those people, but also you gain a new landscape in your own sense of self. So anytime we're listening to music that, as you say, isn't the right soundtrack for our life, it's a powerful way to explore the way we've constructed our lives. Mm-hmm.
I'm finding, this process gives me a great desire to unpack the stuff more than I think would be appropriate for me to attempt in a large shared space like this. But it seems so rich to go into sound, and like there's so many things that feed the understanding of sound and music and how we relate to it, that it, when I think about how it affects my perception of self and my life, really that's actually the biggest thing. It sort of raises this question is like, how do I do this, and how do I sort of go down that path of really, having that sort of relationship, So it's just a sort of thought about it. I mean, it was like, like the direct experience of it is really of sort of attending to complexity, and so much there.
There's a lot there, and it keeps on opening, doesn't it? there's a lot there, and then you go into that and it turns out there's more there. It's very, very rich. Tell me if I'm wrong, I think I'm hearing you say a few things. One of them is that when you pay attention to direct experience, there is a richness, there's a complexity. The other is, as you go down that path, your sense of identity is itself shifted. And that is a path. How do we go down that path? How do we, in a healthy, good way, go down the path of seeing that identity is constructed, and yet we have to continue to live our lives? What's the right way to do that? Did I understand those 2 points?
I think you got the first point correct. I think the
What's the
second
second
point is, I would say it's more like it's reawakening a part of my identity and my instinct, which is to like take something like this and go into it at different directions, find different perspectives, and have sort of feedback and synergy in that sort of process, which I think on a very small scale would be exactly how I perceive this interaction. But I think it's a very small scale for something this rich too. And so it's not so much of what my identity is as how I manifest the identity, like how I manifest this sense of person or self that this is sort of reminding me of. And I perceive that as possible, but I also perceive it as something that's either challenging or something that I fundamentally have to let go of control of and see what happens. But, you know.
And is that the question of how? When you said, how do I do it? You asked how. Does that mean, is part of how mean, do I intentionally manifest in a certain way, or do I let go and see what happens?
Well, I'm not convinced that there's something that I can do there, because my experience when I try to do these things in a direct sense is I can't do them. I mean, partly because you really can't do anything that involves anyone else.
And when you say do means manifest your identity?
Well, manifested in relationship with other people. So, I mean, I can definitely sit there and I can think about something, and I can, go in and I can meditate about something, or I can take it apart, but I don't necessarily have a sense of where I get input to it, or how to take the practice further in a certain sense. So I don't feel like I need a lot of help in finding out how to attend to an experience, but I do think that I need help in seeing parts of an experience, or different perspectives on the experience, or the meaning of something, or that kind of thing. And I find that this specifically is probably one of the best resources I actually have for doing that, but it also, like this sense of, say, being rejected by academia, for example, makes it feel like that there's these things that I've tried to do, but I don't succeed at. So, I guess take it for what it's worth, because it's not such a direct commentary on it, but at the same time we were looking at how this influences our life course, and that's clearly the outcome of that exploration for me, is just like, well, okay, I see this as part of my future, but I have no idea what it looks like, or when or how it might sort of take shape.
Great. And so part of what's happening you have control over. You can do certain things. And part of what's happening you don't have control over. It's a response to what you do, or it's its own agent. And what I think you're saying is it's difficult to know how to explore that path. That's the question you're asking when you say how.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a question for you to answer, it's just the question that comes up.
Yeah. Yep. Should I answer in a small way, or should we just leave it at that?
If you feel an inspiration to add something, I'm happy to.
Simply that to the extent that we can do things, a lot of what happens isn't, as you say, up to us, but to the extent that we can do things, it is important to do good things. in a certain way we can do things. And it's important to do good things when we can do something. Does that make sense?
I agree with you on this.
Now, good. Well, as long as our lives agree with what you and I are saying, we're all set. As long as what we do agrees with what we're saying, then we made it. Yes?
Yeah, I'm still really struck by that first exercise where you kind of did the time dilation on the phrase.
Yeah.
And what was really striking was it was this kind of like event horizon in both of the times you practiced it, where like you could hear the words, then you couldn't really hear the words, and then you couldn't hear the words, and my mind would project the words onto the sound.
Yeah.
And then there was like a step further where my mind could no longer do that, and instead it would project images onto the sound to try to make there still be meaning.
Yeah.
And so my mind was compulsively trying to make it be meaningful, making up like, oh, it's like an alien sound or something like that. And then I thought it'd be really curious to like stop there and then go back and forth between them, because I could just sort of see my mind demanding that there be meaning there, and playing in that kind of interstitial space between them was really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just really curious to explore that.
Yeah. It's a very interesting exercise.
Yeah.
Many people who do it have those same thresholds. And as you say, it's an arena in which you can watch your mind's constant, as you say, demand. And if it demands it doesn't get it, then it will provide it. Another thing that can happen, of course, as you know, as many people here know, is that your mind can give up. And you can have the experience of just those sounds. That side of things, the kind of peace that comes from that, the kind of peace that comes from no longer telling a story, no longer demanding a story come out of the direct experience, is a very common theme in modern mindfulness retreats, activities, and it's a very important one. It's very good that people learn what happens when you set things up, either with an exercise like this or by sitting still in silence. You set things up so that your mind has to work harder and harder to maintain a story until you notice how exhausting it is. Who I am, what I'm going to do, why. I have to be constantly protecting it from everything that's happening and maintaining it from its own inherent inconsistencies. And eventually you give up, and there's a peace that comes with that. This is extremely important. But of course it isn't, as we see, the whole picture. Because our minds do produce meaning, and that has an impact on how we live. The act of imputing meaning is an act that we participate in. Having done that, what we're going to do is mostly already determined. To a large extent, it's already determined. What we're going to do now is much less free. And so that act of imputing meaning, and then the act of taking further steps, as you're saying, how do we explore this? The act of taking further steps, all of that is actually significant. There's significance there. It matters what we do. What we do does matter. And what I hope we are learning here what I hope happens here in this community, what I hope I can somehow compel you to see as the most important thing you can do, is to explore how it is that by letting go of the story, by experiencing the peace of not needing to maintain the story, you get better at producing a good story. And that actually you gain a stand outside of story from which to judge if it's a good story. Now that has to be outside of story. You can't understand it intellectually. But you gain a stand from which to know if an action is good, and a stand from which to take that action. Having taken those actions, in taking them, we're telling a certain story. That story then should be one that makes us more able to release story and become free again. Those stories that grapple us into a fixed position that we're eventually willing to die for are very dangerous. And that's where we're at now. We have held on to a certain story so tightly that we're willing to destroy life on the planet for it. That's what is literally happening right now. We're literally destroying life on this planet because we're holding on to our story so tightly. We're prioritizing our imaginary story over life on the planet. That's where we've come to. That's why I say we're the most indoctrinated demographic of all of world history. Where this is how tightly we're holding on to a completely fabricated fiction. Holding on, and if it means that everyone has to die, well, what can you do? That's how it goes, because this is true. To discover how to tell a story that we can be released from, experience a sense of freedom, but that can't be the end. From there you actually do stuff. You tell a new story. This I know that this is it feels so abstract. I talk about this. I was talking to another teacher recently. She was saying, I don't know, I feel like I'm talking, they're following me, and then I go too far, and it's just like deer in the headlights, and I just lose them. And she said, do you have that experience? I said, yeah, I have that experience a lot. She said, what do you do? And I said, I mean, honestly, I just keep driving. And I just hit them. I don't know what else to do. I just keep going. So to hit you in this case means know that just to talk about me, I have actually given up my life. Okay? I've given up everything. Why? I hope people wonder. I live a strange life. Why? I could do anything. I'm doing this. I'm sitting here now. Why? There's a reason that we here are making this exploration so that we actually let go of a certain way of living, let go of a certain way of seeing. That has to be real, and that's real through experience, not just through descriptions. Once it's made real through experience, then we can observe a completely new life, a completely new way of living. And then this sense of peace and that comes from dropping story, a sense of joy that comes from living a compassionate life, creating a new story, those come together. And that is unimaginable. And yet it bursts forth in a real, tangible life. And that is, I believe, what we are doing here. I believe that making this real is what's happening here Sundays. And as each of us goes through our practice day by day. For that to happen in community is the supreme power on earth. So I applaud all of us here for being a part of that. Yes?
What differentiates that from a fixed view?
Which from a fixed view?
The view you just described. That what we're doing.
You mean my explanation of all of that?
That what we're doing here
Yeah.
is what will save the world. Because you said a fixed view that you're willing to die for, and
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, the message that you give is adopting a life view that you're willing to die for in service of.
Because you're not willing to die for the view. You're willing to die. That's the difference. Most people are only willing to die for a view. But in this path, we learn how to just be willing to die. That's what people don't know how to do. Human beings don't know how to be willing to die. And so we deal with that by becoming willing to die for something. But in this case, we only let go. That's this only let go. But if you haven't let go, but if you even hold on to only letting go, that's this fixed view. And so you even emerge into holding view, saying things like what I'm saying right now. You're even willing to do that. But you don't grasp onto it, that whole thing that you're saying, like I'm saying now, is structured such that you're enabled, you are made more capable of letting go of views, including even the ones I'm saying right now. Having done that, you then discover that there's a kind of compassion that isn't a view. And that is what you live, but you live it by talking about it and having certain codes of conduct and such. But you don't then grab onto it. That difference is just so simple that it's hard to define. Is it a fixed view or not? Well, that depends on if you're fixated on it. That's the difference. And so you want to set up a view that enables you to let go of the view so that you can re-emerge with it. So that you can let go of it. And that way it's continually purified. So we're over 7 o'clock. Past time. We should finish that up. That section.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming. It's my pleasure to talk about some events that we have in the community.